projected, what happens? The gap still remains uncovered. So the government will be forced to go to the market to borrow more than he had indicated in the budget. So that extra borrowing will have an impact on interest rates on the government paper. Government, in terms of borrowing, issues the government bond and gets the money. Now, bond, suppose a 10-year bond, which is considered to be a risk-free sovereign bond as a benchmark, suppose was earlier at a 7.5% yield. What happens when the supply of bond comes much more, prices go down, right? When supply is more than demand, prices of the bonds will go down. What will it do to yields or interest rates? They are inversely related. Interest rates will go up, right? So if prices come lower, interest rates go up. That is your, say now, currently government is borrowing 10-year money at 8.45%. It has moved up from 7.5 to say 8.45. If that is my risk-free 10-year money, what are the businesses going to do? Obviously, businesses are going to borrow at much a higher cost because there is a risk premium, there's an uncertainty premium, there is a tenor premium, and so on. And that would get added on to your benchmark of a 10-year, and therefore interest rates would start to rise. So fiscal deficit becomes important because it forces interest rates to move up. So that is why it is very important for government to manage its borrowing, to manage its expenditure, to introduce market-related reforms. We need to pay what we need to pay. We need not pay much lower price and let the government bear the burden. Like, for example, roads, utilization of road services, we need to pay perhaps tolls, but we really complain because we are so used to subsidy regime and paying not the market price but a subsidized price that we really don't understand much the value of the service that we really ought to understand. So what happened was high inflation, high interest rates therefore had an impact on growth, which in turn had an impact on the government finances. And then we had a new animal called global uncertainty intensifying in Eurozone. Eurozone crisis actually led to further risk aversion. When I say risk aversion, why do I say risk aversion? Because to that extent, my global capital flows become much slower. And because I'm a net importing economy, at least to the extent of my, say, $60 billion, I need capital, right? To build my forex reserves. Why do I need forex reserves? To repay my debt, foreign debt, and also to cover my import bill. So what happens was, very clearly, it actually led to capital flows getting much lower, and that led to some of the fundamental driven risks on the rupee. Added to that, you had Eurozone crisis, making euro versus dollar. These are the two crosses that we talk of. You may have heard of euro touching at 1.30, or that is basically when you say euro is weakening vis-a-vis dollar, that means America's currency, that is US dollar, you have to pay less and less, okay, for that 1 euro, which basically means earlier I would have been paying, as US, I would have been paying say 140, I'm actually paying just 1.30. So that means the dollar has strengthened versus euro. So for India, it actually creates a bad news, because if euro strengthens and if most of our reserves are in dollars, we need to value our dollars, our reserves in dollar terms. So what happens? Rupee then weakens because dollar has become stronger vis-a-vis rupee, and therefore this is what it creates in terms of ruckus. So we need capital flows. The fundamentals drove our rupee much lower. Added to that, we had concerns. We had $306 billion reserves. And if we look at uncertainty, there is a limited room for the Reserve Bank of India to sell dollars in the market to bring down some of the price of INR USD, that is the rupee dollar exchange rate. It cannot do it because if I intervene, or if as an RBI I sell $20 billion in the market, what does it do? Next day, if Eurozone, Greek shows renewed signs of a default, euro cracks, euro goes down under. What does it do to my exchange rate? That $20 billion has gone down the drain. It has gone rupee once again back to weaker levels. So quite clearly, there is limited room that Reserve Bank of India could use. However, very recently, it did introduce some of the measures as recent as a couple of days ago. I'm sure you guys are reading the newspapers that RBI intervenes. What did it do? It actually ring-fenced the market. It did not allow speculative demand to rise in dollar, and therefore it actually allowed a limited play in the forex markets so that to not enable foreign players to have any arbitrage or advantage of different levels of interest rates on the in the Indian markets to take advantage of and speculate on the exchange rate. That's what Reserve Bank of India did very recently. So the point I'm trying to make is suddenly all the headwinds, as we call them in economics, bunched up together. Inflation, interest rates, growth, government finances, weaker rupee, feeding once again into inflation. Why does it feed into inflation? Because we are a net importing economy. So a much weaker rupee, what I was paying 45 rupees to a dollar a few months ago, I'm paying 53 rupees to a dollar. So my inflation has actually moved up. The landed rupee cost has moved up, so I'm paying much more. So that has actually fed into inflationary pressures. So currently what India is grappling with is a bunch of macroeconomic factors which have suddenly become slightly adverse. I don't want to end on bearish tone at all. Definitely there are adverse factors. Definitely these factors will continue to play out not just next 3 months of the current fiscal year, but probably play out into the next year as well, because investment has got hurt, and to create a sustainable growth we need to spur investment. So probably the Reserve Bank of India in March, not in January perhaps, but in March would start cutting rates to create a slightly conducive environment for investments to pick up. And if we have some little bit of semblance of stability in the global markets, would actually create confidence in the minds of the entrepreneurs to be able to revive the investments, to revive the capex cycle, the capacity expansion cycle. And as a result, we could come back to a 7.5% growth. But if, and I want a question, is why India cannot grow at 9 to 10%, not this year, and perhaps not next year also, is because we need global economy to be very strong. That is unlikely to happen for the next 2 years. So we need global recovery, and more importantly, on home front, we need a serious policy push. We need a second burst of policy reforms. Today, land acquisition is an issue. Today, land acquisition needs to get cleared. Minings and Minerals Bill has been cleared. But what about Dr. Tharoor talked of FDI, retail, and the benefits accruing. We have fantastic fiscal reforms waiting in the wings. We have a goods and services tax. We have a DTC. We have the employment of UID, which would help rationalize subsidies. These are reforms waiting in the wings. It's unfortunately getting caught in the policy logjam. But we need these critical reforms to be able to restore the sustainability of growth that India has a huge potential of. As I said, savings and investments and a huge demography are a huge plus points for India. Okay? The other plus point that I did not touch upon, maybe I'll take just a minute, is India has a fabulous feature of having healthy corporate sector balance sheets and healthy banking sector. Imagine banking sector used to see non-performing loans of 12 to 14% in late 90s. Today, those gross performing loans, even in the heightened stress time, are somewhere around 3%. It tells you that banks have been adopting prudent risk management practices, ably facilitated by the central bank, but also equally important is the corporate sector balance sheets. Corporate sectors, imagine being able to withstand $150 of oil per barrel and seeing a $50 per barrel and being able to grow yet with these kind of domestic and external shocks with minimal kind of damage. There would be damage, but a minimal level of damage. So those are the two very strong pillars for India to grow. So fundamentals are very strong. What we really need to do, perhaps it's not bearish sentiment, it's more a sense of exasperation that we have such a huge potential to grow at 8.5 to 9%, if only the policy facilitation would come in quickly, would come in timely, so that we do not lose even the current growth momentum. Before it's completely lost, we actually are able to revive survive it. And that is the reason why we economists believe that there are very strong lessons to learn, that we need to be prudent. We need to be prudent. It's not that businesses are dying. It's not that you and I are not consuming. We need to nurture those investments. We need to nurture that growth of consumption and so on. And that will happen only when we have a benign macroeconomic environment, of course, ably suitably supported by the global growth. But till such time, why not look inward and restore our domestic growth drivers by instilling reforms for population in education, health, hard and soft infrastructure, which Dr. Tharoor alluded to. So why not invest? Why not create that healthy environment? And India's growth story will continue to remain intact, with just, on hindsight, we can call it that it has just been a mid-cyclical correction. Thank you.